This video is sponsored by Crossout, a free-to-play action game, and as a bonus for registering through our link below, you'll get a selection of 3 weapons or a vehicle cabin for free, but the best way for me to show you that game is to jump over to the computer, so let's do that.
Hey guys, welcome to Crossout. This is an online vehicle action combat game where you get to build your own vehicle. It's super easy to get into. I built this guy in about, 5 minutes. Maybe it shows. But what you can do is you can just replace anything you want on here. So let's say I don't want these tracks anymore. Whoops-a-daisy, I do want that base though. And then let's get rid of that. And let's pop some wheels on the side just for fun. Whatever. And then what you do is you take it out for a quick test drive if you like. I've discovered that my turning circle on this thing is absolutely horrendous. So let's make some changes. So yeah, there's an absolutely huge amount of parts that you can choose from. You can really build it however you want, and it's really easy to get into. And then when you play games, there's a whole bunch. I'm just going to battle against AI vehicles, so it's me, some other dudes from across the interwebs. This guy has a cloaking device. That is pretty amazing, although it's not super functional. Whoa, look at this! What has this guy made? It's like a scorpion. Okay, I might only have 3 wheels left and be on fire, but at least we got him. God, it's become quite challenging to turn, I have to admit. Let's just shoot him from over here, shall we? Oops, the daisy. Well, it was fun while it lasted. Guys, this is Crossout. Wow, look at that beast. This has been Crossout, guys. Go check this out. There's a link below.
In 2003, the town of Erie, Pennsylvania made national news when an unassuming pizza delivery man walked into a local bank and demanded $250,000 from the vault. What happened next would baffle authorities for years and see the crime become one of the most intriguing ever committed in the United States. So what happened? At roughly 2:30 p.m. on August the 28th, 2003, a 46-year-old man by the name of Brian Wells walked into the Erie branch of PNC Bank and handed the teller a note which read, "Gather employees with access codes to the vault and work fast to fill a bag with $250,000. You have only 15 minutes." As the teller read the note, Wells informed them that he had a live explosive around his neck that would detonate if the demand wasn't met. He then pulled down his shirt to reveal a crude but threatening-looking metal collar with 2 pipe bombs attached. Wells was also holding a custom-made cane that doubled as a shotgun. Showing a remarkable amount of professionalism, the bank workers informed Wells that it wouldn't be possible to retrieve the sum of money in such a short amount of time due to the various safeguards that limit access to the vault. Wells then simply asked for whatever they had available, taking time to grab a lollipop from the counter, which he began to idly suck on whilst waiting for his money. All in all, Wells would leave the bank about 12 minutes later with $8,702 in cash. He then went to McDonald's next door for a bit, as you do, after which he went back to his car. As you might imagine, hanging around in the parking lot next door to the bank you just robbed isn't a great way to not get caught. And so it was that Wells found himself tackled by police officers as he was walking to his vehicle. Whilst being cuffed, Wells helpfully informed the troopers of the bomb around his neck and that 3 black men had put it there. He further stated that, as far as he was aware, it would go off any minute. Naturally, the officers, all very abruptly, backed away from Wells, no doubt mumbling to themselves that they were too old for this shit if movies have taught me anything. After getting a safe distance away, they called the bomb squad. As for Wells, for 20 agonizing minutes, he sat alone on the concrete, occasionally shouting to officers to check if they'd called his boss to inform him why Wells hadn't come back to work after the delivery and inquiring when the bomb squad was going to show up. Unfortunately for Wells, just a few minutes before said explosives experts arrived, the collar around his neck began beeping, never a good sign. Wells's calm demeanor disappeared completely at this point, and he frantically wiggled backwards in a futile attempt to get away from the bomb. Approximately 10 seconds after the beeping started, the collar exploded, killing him. After the bomb squad checked the collar to ensure all explosives had detonated, the gathered law enforcement began slowly sifting through Wells's belongings, beginning what would soon become one of the most unusual cases in the annals of law enforcement history. Most pertinent to the topic at hand, while searching through Wells's beat-up old Geo Metro, they stumbled across several pages of handwritten instructions ominously addressed simply to the bomb hostage. These instructions, evidently meant for Wells, included several explicit warnings against deviating from them in any way and were littered with threats of harsh and instantaneous reprisal should they be ignored, including remote detonation of the bomb. Further, on one page it stated, "This powerful, booby-trapped bomb can be removed only by following our instructions. Act now, think later, or you will die." Later analysis would conclude that these threats were baseless, as there was no way to detonate the collar remotely, despite a cell phone seeming to be connected to the bomb. In fact, though, this was just a realistic-looking toy phone. As for what the instructions were telling Wells to do, beyond, of course, instructing him to rob the bank, what followed was a twisted scavenger hunt to find several keys which the instructions claimed would delay the timer on the bomb and eventually disarm it completely. At that point, they stated he would be able to safely remove it without setting it off. However, it turns out, along with the cell phone being fake, the various keyholes weren't wired or linked to anything. As if this wasn't bad enough, experts analyzing the collar would later conclude that although the device looked dangerous and sophisticated, including a lot of wires that seemed to be connected in significant ways, the guts of the bomb actually had the complexity of, to quote one of the investigators, a child's toy, more or less just two pretty run-of-the-mill pipe bombs connected to two electronic kitchen timers, with nothing complicated about any of it. Cut the wires to the timers, and there would be no boom. Further, it turns out that even that wasn't necessary to save Wells's life, as had he simply reached up and tugged the mechanism to allow it to open and then taken it off, this too wouldn't have triggered the bomb. He could have even simply added time to the timers manually or turned them off if he wanted to leave the collar on without risk. So what devil made this dastard device of destruction? Investigators tried to follow the trail laid out in the instructions, traveling several miles to a nearby wood to find another note, which in turn directed them to a seemingly random road sign miles in the other direction. The trail went cold at the road sign when a jar that was supposed to contain yet another clue turned up empty. Investigators would later surmise that the killer or killers had learned of Wells's death and abandoned their plans to continue placing clues for him. Either that, or they'd simply assumed that he'd not have had time to get to that point before the bomb would detonate, so they didn't bother leaving another message. With nothing else to go on, investigators turned to looking more into Wells. To begin with, upon initially being arrested, Wells, as noted, had alleged that the collar had been forcibly placed upon him by a group of large black men during a routine pizza delivery. Looking into it, indeed, Wells had been working at Mamma Mia's Pizzeria when a call came in for what turned out to be a payphone at around 1:30 p.m. of that day, August the 28th, 2003. The original person who answered the pizzeria phone couldn't understand the speaker, so passed it over to Wells, who then took the order and ultimately went out to deliver the pizzas. Following the trail, investigators went to the site of that last delivery, a TV transmission tower at the end of a dirt road, and found nothing of significance other than a neighbor who stated he'd heard a gunshot at approximately the time Wells would have been delivering the pizzas. Local law enforcement, and later the FBI, further found nothing that would give Wells motive to commit such a bizarre crime had he been the one to instigate it. Wells had no apparent significant outstanding debts or commitments and was noted as being a model employee and a man of good moral standing. People who knew him described him as a simple man, but also a very nice and seemingly happy person. In short, the authorities were at a complete loss. In fact, it's possible this bizarre crime would have remained a mystery forever had the police not received a phone call a few weeks later from a man called Bill Rothstein. You see, Rothstein lived near the TV transmission tower Wells had made his final delivery to, and had even been interviewed by the FBI, who combed his property for clues, finding nothing. This changed, however, when Rothstein inexplicably confessed to having a human body in his freezer. After being arrested, Rothstein identified the body as that of Jim Roden, the lover of one of his ex-girlfriends, then 54-year-old Marjorie Deal Armstrong. Rothstein insisted that he had nothing to do with Roden's death and that his ex had shot and killed Roden during an argument. Not wanting to incur his ex's vengeful wrath, Rothstein had hidden the body at her insistence and even helped dispose of the murder weapon. However, when Deal Armstrong told him to grind up the body and bury it, Rothstein decided that enough was enough, and he confessed. Now, initially, the FBI wrote the whole location of the two crimes off as just a bizarre coincidence. That is, until Rothstein told local police that he was so racked with guilt about the whole ordeal that he'd contemplated killing himself. So, well, why is this important? Well, to prove this, Rothstein directed police to a suicide note that he'd stashed away in a drawer. Along with containing a confession about the murder of Roden and his remorse over his involvement, it also, for some reason, contained the sentence, "This has nothing to do with the Wells case." Naturally, this led to some follow-up questions about why he had written that. While Rothstein and D.L. Armstrong initially flatly denied having anything to do with the collar bomb plot, once again leaving authorities with nothing solid, over the course of many years of investigation that followed, this trail did lead somewhere, and things slowly became reasonably clear. To begin with, it's important to note that while in her younger years D.L. Armstrong had been a straight-A student type and ultimately even earned a master's degree in college, she also had mental health problems that only got worse with age. On that note, previous to murdering Roden, it came to light that she had shot and killed one Robert Thomas in 1984. As to why she wasn't in prison for it, she was acquitted as it was deemed self-defense, despite that it had apparently just been sitting on the couch at the time and she had shot him not once, not twice, not 3 times, but rather 6 times. Further, 8 years later, in 1992, her husband, Richard Armstrong, died of a cerebral hemorrhage. While we can only hope that this was naturally induced, it is noteworthy that she managed to finagle a rather sizable legal settlement with the hospital involved over it. She also allegedly had a couple of other men in her life who likewise met rather untimely deaths at ages where men not acquainted with D.L. Armstrong didn't normally find themselves failing to continue breathing. Whatever the case with any of that, she was ultimately convicted of the murder of Roden. At the same time, police were still trying to figure out if they could connect her and Rothstein more concretely to the Wells case, but they were coming up empty. That is, until D.L. Armstrong herself became tired of the high-security prison life at Muncie Correctional Institution about a year and a half after Wells's death. She thus requested to be transferred to a minimum security prison. In exchange for granting her request, she would tell authorities anything and everything they wanted to know about the Wells case. This is something she subsequently did. A further break was had, getting another side of the story not long after, when one Kenneth Barnes' brother-in-law decided to call the police to let them know Mr. Barnes, a retired individual who'd taken up drug dealing for some extra money, had bragged to him about his own involvement in the pizza collar bomber case. As for Barnes, he was easy for police to find, as he was sitting in a prison cell at the time after being arrested for his little side job as a crack dealer. Once confronted, Barnes too had a story of his own to tell the police. Naturally, the confessions of those involved should be met with some degree of skepticism on the finer points, particularly as they all pointed the finger at someone else being the mastermind behind the whole thing. That caveat out of the way, combining all the evidence and the stories together, the generally accepted tale the investigators cobbled together is as follows. It would seem that leading up to the bank robbery, D.L. Armstrong approached Barnes to see if he wouldn't mind killing her father. As to why, she believed, whether accurately or not isn't clear, that his net worth was approximately $2 million, about $2.7 million today. Notably, in his waning years, he'd begun donating this small fortune to various charities. To ensure that she got the bulk of the sum, she apparently figured it would be best not to wait for him to die naturally, but to just kill him immediately. The problem was that when she asked Barnes to take him out, Barnes asked for a sum of $200,000, not exactly something she had lying around, and he was unwilling to do the job with only the promise of money after the inheritance was acquired. So, how to come up with the $200,000 to get $2 million? Well, robbing a bank apparently seemed like the easy solution if one could think of a way to ensure there was no chance of getting caught. At some point here, it's not clear when, Rothstein became involved, with D.L. Armstrong herself claiming he was the mastermind behind the whole thing in the first place, though most authorities think that it was, in fact, her. And for whatever it's worth, Barnes claims that D.L. Armstrong herself first asked him if he knew how to make a bomb for the plot, but he didn't, and thus Rothstein, who was a bit of a closet genius and worked as a handyman and shop teacher, did. Whatever the case, plan developed, they now needed someone to actually go rob the bank and function as the fall guy should things go wrong. Enter prostitute Jessica Hoopsick, who was an acquaintance of Barnes through his drug-dealing business, including using his house as a bit of a home base to entertain clients, as apparently several prostitutes in the area did. While elements of Hoopsick's story, as with all the others involved, are considered somewhat suspect, she claims she was asked by Barnes for someone who might be easily pressured into committing a crime, though she stated she had no knowledge at the time of what that crime would be. In exchange for drugs and money, she thus gave them the name of one of her frequent clients, Wells, as an ideal candidate, given he was, to quote her, a pushover. Hoopsick also claims, at least as far as she was aware, Wells had no prior knowledge of the plot before his fateful pizza delivery on the day of his death. This brings us to Wells's role in the plan. While there is still some debate on this point, it would seem actually that Wells had known the plan going into the delivery, though he had been pressured into agreeing to it in the first place. Whether this is actually true or not, it would appear on the day of the event he decided to back out. You might be thinking, well, if he decided to back out, why did he go deliver the pizzas? Well, it would appear his reticence to remain involved was squarely centered around the fact that in the planning stage he had been told the bomb would be fake, but upon arriving on the day in question he discovered they'd lied to him and Rothstein had, in fact, made a real bomb. Thus, when they tried to put the collar on him, he attempted to flee, resulting in a gun being fired as a warning shot which was heard by the neighbor. Further, according to Barnes, he had to punch Wells in the face to get him to allow the collar to be put on. From there, it is speculated that he was probably under the impression that he needed to follow the steps as laid out to get the collar off, which would go a long way in explaining why he chose to go to get the paper with the next step at the McDonald's next door, rather than, fleeing the scene of the crime immediately after committing it. Unless, of course, he just wanted to get caught, which would have been a massive risk, but perhaps one he felt was better than returning to his compatriots. Of course, as the bomb put a hole in his chest, we'll never know what he was thinking at the time. But given that there was no way for Wells to complete the steps the notes required of him in the time allotted, it is thought by the authorities the conspirators had always planned for him to die. The steps were simply to lead him out of town where the bomb would detonate and they would go collect the cash. Making sure he felt he needed to follow them just ensured that he wouldn't lead police right back to them. Had they left him alive, even if he wasn't initially caught, there was little chance Wells wouldn't be identified and arrested. And on the flip side, should he be caught before the bomb went off, well, the limited time on the device gave good odds Wells wouldn't have time to spill the beans. Thus, aside from the mistake of having Wells go to the McDonald's next to the bank, this was a pretty ingenious plan overall. Had Wells made it out of town, it's likely they would have gotten the cash with no further leads for the police other than Wells's body. This all brings us back to Rodin's death, which foiled the whole plan. According to a fellow inmate of D.L. Armstrong's, she allegedly told said unnamed inmate that the argument the couple had was over the scheme. Allegedly, Rodin told her that if she didn't call off the plot, he was going to tell the police. Rather than nix the plan, she simply decided to kill him and then handed the body over to Rothstein. From there, she allegedly threatened him to keep his mouth shut or he'd get the same. Whatever the truth, in the end, Rothstein died of lymphoma in 2004 at the age of 60, years before any of this would become known, and thus is the only one of the primary conspirators to avoid jail time. D.L. Armstrong met her maker thanks to breast cancer, dying in prison on April 4, 2017. As for Barnes, he joined the pair in the afterlife in June of 2019 at the age of 65 from complications due to diabetes. So I really hope you found that video interesting and suitably bizarre. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Do check out our fantastic sponsor Crossout, they're linked to below. And as always, thank you for watching.